In the shadow of Tenochtitlan's Great Pyramid, where obsidian blades caught the last light of dying suns, a different kind of theater unfolded behind screens of jaguar hide and human bone. The puppet masters wore feathered masks that concealed their living faces, while their hands breathed unnatural life into performers who would never bow, never speak, never breathe again. Lord Tlacaelol's corpse, adorned in jade and quetzal feathers, jerked through the motions of his final battle as wooden rods threaded through his preserved limbs forced him to dance the story of his heroic death. This was the macabre artistry of Aztec corpse puppet theater, where the deceased nobility continued to serve their empire, not in memory, but in flesh, their preserved bodies becoming vessels for divine narratives that blurred the boundaries between performance and necromancy. The practice emerged from the Aztec belief that death was merely a transformation of state rather than an ending, and that the physical forms of the noble dead retained spiritual potency that could be harnessed for sacred theater. Unlike the ephemeral shadows cast by living actors, corpse puppets carried the authentic weight of death, their performances blessed with the gravity of genuine sacrifice. The Codex Telleriano-Ramensis, one of the few surviving Aztec manuscripts to document these rituals, describes how the preserved bodies of sacrificed nobles were fitted with intricate wooden armatures that could manipulate every joint, creating an illusion of life that was both mesmerizing and profoundly disturbing. The preparation of corpse puppets required months of meticulous work by specialized priest artisans known as mictlamacini, literally death teachers. The process began immediately after sacrifice, with the body drained of blood and organs while preserving the muscle structure and skin. A complex mixture of tree resins, crushed jade, and psychoactive plant extracts was injected into the corpse's tissues, creating a preservation method that kept the flesh supple for years while imbuing it with sacred properties. Anthropologist Eduardo Matos Moctezuma notes, the Aztec understanding of death as theatrical performance reached its apex in these puppet rituals, where the boundary between sacred drama and necromantic art dissolved entirely. The armatures themselves were marvels of pre-Columbian engineering, carved from cecropia wood and joined with sinew and obsidian pins that allowed for remarkably fluid movement. Spanish chronicler Diego Duran, witnessing these performances shortly after the conquest, wrote with barely concealed horror. They moved as if alive, these decorated corpses, their glass eyes reflecting torchlight, while their mouths opened and closed, as if speaking words from beyond the grave. Even knowing them to be dead, one could not watch without feeling that some essence of life lingered in their painted flesh. The theatrical spaces where these performances occurred were unlike any other structures in Mesoamerica. Built as underground amphitheaters accessible only through hidden entrances, these chambers featured acoustic properties that amplified whispers while dampening screams, creating an otherworldly sound environment where the voices of puppet masters seemed to emerge from the corpses themselves. The walls were painted with scenes from the underworld, their pigments mixed with ground bone and blood, creating murals that appeared to shift and writhe in the flickering light of copal torches. Performances followed strict liturgical calendars, with different corpse puppets assigned to specific deities and mythological cycles. The most elaborate productions recreated the epic battles between Quetzalcoatl and Tezcatlipoca, with deceased warriors from opposing city-states forced to reenact their conflicts in death as they had in life. These performances could last for days, with puppet masters working in shifts to maintain the illusion of continuous action. Audience members, exclusively priests and nobility, would consume chocolate mixed with hallucinogenic mushrooms, enhancing their ability to perceive spiritual dimensions within the theatrical spectacle. The puppets' costumes were masterworks of mortuary art, created from materials that carried deep, symbolic significance. Feathered headdresses incorporated plumes from sacrificed birds, while jade ornaments were carved from stones that had been buried with previous generations of dead nobles. Most unsettling were the masks, crafted from the faces of the corpse's own relatives, creating a layered identity where multiple generations of the same family performed together in death. These multi-generational performances were considered the highest form of ancestral worship, with entire noble lineages represented in single theatrical productions. The repertoire of corpse puppet theatre drew from a vast mythology of death and rebirth, but the most popular performances depicted the journey of the deceased through Mictlan, the Aztec underworld. These productions required multiple corpse puppets working in elaborate coordination, their preserved forms navigating obstacle courses that represented the trials facing souls in the afterlife. The puppet representing the recently deceased would be guided by older corpses representing ancestors, creating a literal genealogy of death performed by the actual dead. Spanish conquistador Hernán Cortés encountered one of these performances during his march to Tenochtitlan and later wrote to Charles V. In chambers beneath their temples, they stage plays using the bodies of their sacrificed dead, moving them with hidden strings as if they retained the spark of life. The sight is so contrary to Christian sensibility that several of my men fled weeping, unable to witness such blasphemous art. This reaction reveals how profoundly alien these performances were to European sensibilities, representing a form of sacred theatre that Christianity could only interpret as demonic. The puppet masters themselves underwent extensive training that began in childhood and lasted decades. They learned not only the technical skills of corpse manipulation, but also the spiritual disciplines necessary to commune with the dead. Many reported experiencing dreams where deceased puppets would instruct them in new performance techniques or reveal forgotten mythological details. This ongoing communication between living puppeteers and dead performers created a collaborative artistic process that spanned the boundary between life and death. The most sophisticated corpse puppet productions incorporated living elements alongside the dead, with priests and dancers interacting directly with the preserved bodies in choreographed sequences that blended mortality and immortality. These hybrid performances were considered the ultimate expression of Aztec theological understanding, that existence was a continuous cycle where death and life interpenetrated rather than opposing each other. The living performers would often report feeling the presence of the deceased puppets as genuine spiritual entities rather than mere theatrical props. Archaeological excavations beneath Mexico City have uncovered several of these underground theaters, their walls still bearing traces of the bone and blood pigments used in their original decoration. More disturbing are the puppet storage chambers, where wooden armatures remain scattered among fragments of preserved human remains. These discoveries have allowed researchers to reconstruct the technical aspects of corpse puppet theatre, though the spiritual dimensions remain largely incomprehensible to modern sensibilities. The practice reached its zenith during the reign of Moctezuma II, when the most elaborate productions incorporated dozens of corpse puppets in massive spectacles that could accommodate audiences of hundreds. These imperial performances were diplomatic events where visiting dignitaries from allied and enemy city-states would witness the theatrical resurrection of famous warriors and nobles, serving both as entertainment and as demonstrations of Aztec spiritual power over death itself. The Spanish conquest brought an abrupt end to corpse puppet theatre, with conquistadors and missionaries burning the theatres and destroying the preserved bodies they found. However, indigenous chronicles suggest that some puppet masters fled to remote mountain regions where simplified versions of the practice continued in secret for decades. The last recorded performance allegedly took place in 1571, nearly 50 years after the fall of Tenochtitlan, when Spanish authorities discovered a hidden theater where a single corpse puppet, dressed in pre-conquest regalia, performed nightly for an audience of elderly Aztec priests who had never accepted Christianity. The psychological impact of witnessing corpse puppet theater must have been profound, even for Aztec audiences accustomed to spectacular violence and death. These performances forced viewers to confront mortality not as an abstract concept, but as an immediate physical presence, with deceased friends and relatives continuing to perform their social roles beyond the grave. The theater served multiple functions: ancestor veneration, historical preservation, religious instruction, and perhaps most importantly, the maintenance of social hierarchies that extended beyond death itself. In museum storage rooms across Mexico, fragments of wooden armatures and scraps of preserved tissue wait in catalogued silence, while researchers debate their historical significance, never suspecting that on certain nights when the moon is dark and the air grows thick with copal smoke, shadows move against storage room walls in patterns that suggest the ancient performances have never truly ended.